Continue on with chapter 6, and we're going to get into the love and marriage parts. We talked about friendships, we talked about that initial attraction and how we, start dating and relationships that way. Now we're going to talk about that next step. And I'm going to say that the when making this decision to become committed to somebody in a more long-term commitment, whether it's marriage or just this idea that you're going to be long-term partners, one of the biggest things that you have to make sure, and especially with marriage because it is legally binding, is that you're making the decision freely on your own, because it's something that you want. So there's this idea of psychological reactance, and this idea that we tend to hold on really tight to our ability to make our own decisions and have freedom of will. And so, what will happen if, and maybe this is a situation that you experienced, was as a teenager, maybe you were dating somebody that your parents didn't like, and they told you, we forbid you to see them anymore. We don't think they're a good influence on you. You're not allowed to date them anymore. And now, so what did you do? It's likely that you did not just say, okay, mom, okay, dad, I'll tell them we can't hang out anymore. And it's likely you dug your heels in, and you're not going to tell me who I can date. And it made you want to date them even more just to prove your parents wrong. So, what the idea is of psychological reactance is that when somebody tries to tell us what we can or can't do, it makes us want to do it even more. So, when you're talking about marriage or long term commitment, you have to make sure that you're doing it not as a way to like spite somebody else or prove somebody else wrong, and that you're doing it because it's something that you genuinely want to do and take to this next level. Now, should you stay single? This is an option that our generation, or this, in society now, it's more readily acceptable that people have, many more people are choosing to stay single. And that doesn't mean like that they don't get into relationships or they don't have significant others, but it's not this marriage necessarily for life type of commitment. And in the past, this was considered taboo. Like if you weren't 20 years old and already planning out your future and had your life partner, then you were going to be an old spinster and nobody was going to want you. And what's wrong with you that you don't want this next stage of life? But now more and more people are making this decision. And research does show that being in a solid, content marriage does have benefits as far as financial benefits, emotional benefits. It helps us with our stress and to live longer because we feel like we're not alone in tackling life's challenges. But the problem with that is it's all negated if the marriage is not at least content. So if it's a bad marriage, if there's tension, if there's fighting, it can actually negate any of the benefits and make all of those things even worse. So it can make your immune system weaker. You can have health problems. You can have heart troubles. You can have stomach issues, emotional issues. So the reasons for getting married aren't necessarily the same as they were decades ago. There used to be, for a lot of culture, a lot of society, the need that in order for there to be a sexual connection or a sexual relationship, that you should be married. That sex before marriage was seen as a negative, taboo thing in many religions, cultures, families, which now there's not the same level of expectation as there once was. So that is no longer plays a role in whether or not you should or should not get married for many cultures. Um, there are right and wrong reasons to get married. I tell my students over and over and over again when we're in person is that if a relationship is broken now, marriage is not going to fix that. So if there is emotional abuse, physical abuse, if there's control issues, um, then thinking in your head, well, if I marry this person, then because I'm their wife, they'll respect me more, or because I'm their husband, they won't try to control me as much or whatever. So If there are these issues in a relationship prior to marriage, marriage is not going to take them away. In fact, research shows that especially in cases of abuse, if there is abuse prior to marriage, once you are married, the abuse will actually get exponentially worse because you are now viewed as more like it'll be more difficult for you to leave the situation now. They almost view it as though now you are their property and that there's nothing you can do about it. It's not as easy for you to leave. So if your decision to get married has any thought process of you're trying to fix something, that is not the right reason to get married and you should not do it. So the qualities of a successful marriage are very similar to what we discussed when we talked about friendship, but it takes it to that deeper level. My spouse is my best friend, and this is why I asked that question last week: is can you truly be just friends with somebody that you could potentially be romantically involved with? And the reason for that is because most marriages, most long-term relationships begin with a friendship. I like my spouse as a person. So this might seem like, well, duh, you're not going to marry somebody if you don't like them. But here's the catch to that. I like my spouse as the person they are now, not the person who I want to change them into. So if you're like, oh, me and my significant other, we're perfect together. I love him so much. If only and you have like a checklist of the things you would change, or she would be absolutely perfect for me if just, and you have this list, then you're not accepting them for who they are. So you shouldn't go into a marriage with a list of things that you are going to have to change about this person during the course of your marriage in order for them to be the right fit for you. Understanding that marriage is a long-term commitment. I know Hollywood does us a disservice. You hear all the time about these like drive-through weddings and then the next day getting divorced, or the shortest marriage in history and all these tabloid things. But for real life, real people, it's not that easy. Divorce, breaking up, ending it, excuse me, is not an easy, first of all, it's not an easy decision. It's financially hard, even if you don't like share property or things, just the filing of the paperwork and stuff. It's an expensive process. So don't go in, if you are going into marriage saying in the back of your head, oh, we can always get divorced if it doesn't work out, then you are not ready to marry that person. Divorce should not be a part of the equation when you're entering into marriage. We agree on the same goals and aims in life. My spouse, and the wording of this, I actually would prefer to change it. So it says my spouse has grown more interesting to me. It really should be I have grown more interesting, because why should we put that expectation, that provision on our spouse, on our significant other, if we are getting boring? So a lot of times when you're in a long-term relationship, things get stagnant. You get in your routine, you do the same things day after day, night after night, and it just kind of gets content and boring. So making sure you're still doing things for yourself that are interesting to you, that when you come together at the end of the night, that you can have a discussion and share with them things that you did, things that they did, and have some fun, interesting conversations. Because if you're both so entwined in each other's lives that you have nothing separate, then how does that keep you guys interested in each other? Wanting the relationship to succeed and understanding that marriage is sacred. Okay. So early in marriage, so first of all, we are a very wedding based society. So you can go on TLC at any point and there's like 50 different shows, say yes to the dress, say yes to the bridesmaid's dress, 30 or 90-day bride, or Bridezilla. There's all these different wedding shows, and we are so wedding focused that sometimes we forget that after a wedding there's going to be a marriage, and you need to go into that process not so focused on the wedding that you forget to plan and prepare and put as much energy in working towards the success of the wedding as you are the success of your marriage. So discussing things, having the discussion of role expectations. I had actual friends that the woman wasn't like prior to marriage, she didn't cook. She hated cooking. Her idea of making dinner was ordering a pizza or getting takeout. She just didn't cook. And they got married, and it was like, after things had settled down, he finally one day was like, "So when are you going to start making us dinner nightly or whatever?" And she looked at him like he had two heads and was like, "What do you mean?" "Well, I just thought that since we're married now that you would, kind of take on your wifely duty and start making us dinner." And she was so taken aback, and this became a point of contention for them for quite a while because he felt that there were certain roles and expectations in a marriage and that she should have stepped into this role, and she felt that was ridiculous and that he knew who he was getting when he married her, and why would he expect things to change just because they were married. So having this discussion, and it may seem so, she never expected that he would expect her to just magically change because you're married, but there are still held beliefs on them there being traditional roles in marriage and expectations. So having that discussion prior to marriage. Okay, so we're done with that section. So now, after you make that decision, if you're going to get married or be in a long-term committed relationship, then traditionally will come the decision about parenthood. Are you going to have a child? And sometimes, life throws us a curveball, and we may get that surprise pregnancy or surprise announcement that you weren't expecting, and it kind of throws that traditional path of life out of whack. But making that decision to become a parent is a huge step in life, and it impacts other areas of our life than just the ability to have children. And it's so vitally important. So there are some conversations you just definitely 100% should have prior to marriage or long-term commitment whenever possible. First is money issues, discussing how you want to balance finances, what are your roles going to be, especially if one is a saver, one is a spender. How are you going to manage money? Money issues are one of the number one causes of divorce. You want to have that talk beforehand. The second, and probably almost equally as important, is children. First of all, are you going to have children? So, I have another couple of friend of mine, they just never discussed having children. She was very much focused on starting her career, building her career, and really had no intention of ever having children because she was planning this out. He in his mind assumed that once they got married that she was going to want to have children and that would be the next step. And so they got married, and it was like a couple of years into their marriage he made a comment like, "So when are we going to start talking about the next step and when we're going to start our family or whatever?" And she felt blindsided because she thought it was pretty clear that her career was her child and she had no intention of having children, and he didn't. And this is one of those issues that you can't compromise on. There, in almost every single case, if you compromise on this situation, so if you don't want to have children and you begrudgingly agree to have one to make the other person happy, or vice versa, if you want children and they absolutely don't, and so you agree not to, this is something that will almost always haunt you in the relationship later on. It will cause resentment and it will cause issues. So you have to have that discussion prior to marriage or long-term commitment. And then taking it that step further. When you make the decision to have children, you also have to have the talk about who's going to be the primary caregiver. Are you both going to be working parents and pay to put your child in daycare? Do you have extended family that'll be able to help? These are all things you need to be thinking about prior to, whenever possible, prior to having that children, because those are huge hurdles that can impact your relationship and the family. And then you've got problems that can arise. So if when it comes to that role in childcare, so a mother that is, so I always laugh that when you, or not laugh, I joke that when when a mother has a baby, the space that the baby took up in her body is immediately replaced by guilt. And it's like society guilt because there's no reason for her to feel guilt, but society puts these unrealistic expectations on motherhood. And on one hand, we're told that we need to go out, have a career, be successful, be financially independent, help support our families financially. But then, if you have children, that means also that you are putting your child in childcare, daycare with relatives. And so that means you're not the primary caregiver all the time. So a mother may feel guilty over leaving her child in the care of somebody else. If she decides to stay home and be the primary caregiver, she may feel guilty because she's not contributing financially to the family in a concrete, like bringing home a paycheck type of way. She is contributing because she's saving the expenses of childcare and such, but it's not like she's making a set paycheck that's helping to pay the bills. Um, so these are issues that have to be discussed beforehand, and there also has to be some flexibility because you may come up with a great plan, and after that baby's born, you realize, like, you know what? Being at home alone with this baby 24/7 isn't for me. I need to get out and be out of the house. And so there's got to be some flexibility as well. Communication is the um, biggest way to diminish problems in any sort of marriage or relationship. When you are regularly and openly communicating with your partner and rehashing, so it's good to have a plan. It's good, and research shows that having a 2-year plan is the most solid way, especially early on in relationships and making starting a family. And the reason for this is because it gives you some time to look forward to the future, but it's not so far out that it seems unrealistic and unattainable. So make a 2-year plan with your partner and discuss things and constantly keep that communication open to help relieve problems as they come up. I addressed this a few minutes ago, forgetting that it was coming up. So that money, children, all of these are our biggest causes of problems in relationships. Okay, so John Gottman is a therapist that works with families and parents, couples. And he discusses how there are different defense mechanisms that you will have in relationships when there are problems, and that some of these are more dangerous to a relationship than others. So I'm going to go over them and explain why they're bad for a relationship and which one's the worst. So criticism, when you're constantly criticizing your partner, obviously this is going to break them down, weaken the relationship, make communication difficult. Contempt, and this is one where one partner feels as though they have this kind of attitude of superiority where they kind of treat their partner as their inferior, as they're maybe not as intelligent, maybe they're not as aware of things, they'll kind of belittle them. Defensiveness, and this one's hard to wrap your mind around because if you're experiencing criticism or contempt, the way that you respond to that treatment can also impact the relationship. And if your way of dealing with it is just to get defensive and maybe snap back in the same way, it's only going to exacerbate the problems in the relationship that are leading to those. So there are healthy ways to communicate with the person, and sometimes bringing in a therapist or a pastor, a mediator, somebody that is unbiased to help you communicate before it gets to the point of defensiveness is really helpful. And the last one, and this is the one that's considered to be the worst, is stonewalling. And what this is where you kind of put up a wall around you, where you are so checked out, so done with the relationship that you literally withdraw yourself from it. You just shut down. You don't communicate anymore. You don't talk. If they're yelling at you, your response is just, okay, whatever, okay. You're not even checked into the relationship anymore. And the reason why this is considered the most dangerous to a relationship success is because if you are to the point where it's not even worth fighting over anymore, it's really hard to bring a person back from that stage. If they have disengaged themselves so much from the relationship that they don't even care anymore, then to bring them back to the point where they care and they want to put in time and effort to make the relationship a success is it takes a lot. And so usually if you're to the point in your relationship where you're at stonewalling, then this is usually at the point where the relationship ends in many situations, unless the person is just truly committed to seeing it through and making it work. Finally, this 5-to-1 ratio idea. Gottman also said in his research that arguing and fighting is actually a healthy thing in a relationship if done in the right way. So everyone's going to argue, everyone's going to have disagreements, and if you don't take it to the point of personal attacks, if you are able to communicate well during the argument and disagreement, it can actually help strengthen your relationship because it's teaching you that you can face conflict and work through it together. But Gottman says that the best way of balancing this is that for every one fight you have or disagreement, then you should be having 5 positive interactions in your relationship. So you should be doing things fun that you enjoy, having pleasant conversations, pleasant interactions. And if that balance is there, for every one time you fight, you're having 5 good positive interactions, then that's considered a healthy balance of conflict with peaceful time. So to expect a relationship to be just conflict free isn't realistic. And you have to know how to find that balance of, okay, it's okay to disagree, but then I'm going to focus on there being pleasant interactions in my relationship too. Okay, so we are done. You ignore the homework and stuff on that part. So remember, the homework for chapter 6 now will be due on Monday, November 2nd, I believe it is. Let me just check this. Yes, Monday, November 2nd will be the chapter 6 homework due. So please make sure to review the rest of the notes if I skipped anything over. And if you have any questions, let me know. Have a great week. Bye all.